One of my favorite images of the church is a ship under full sail. I don't know if you're aware of it, but it is one of the most ancient of all the symbols of the church. And today we have two stories of how cultures and faith interact when they encounter each other. And the first story takes place in the period of the kings of Israel, the second during the Roman Empire in the time of Jesus. And the third story you have not heard yet, but it has to do with our time. The scholar Phyllis Tickle has said that there are periods throughout human history when there is a great sorting out of ideas and practices and ways of living. And she maintains that we are living in just such an age of sorting out. So the metaphor of the ship, the pilgrimage, the journey, the voyager, the explorer is a very good image for us. And with that image, I want to remind you that one of the things that happened to ancient ships, in fact, it happens to modern ships too, is that as they sail from place to place throughout the world, they began gathering up evidences of where they have been on the hulls of their ships. And these are called barnacles. There are 1,000 species of barnacles. And by and large, they are basically harmless to the ship until they build up and build up and build up and are not taken care of. And then what begins to happen to wooden ships, at least, is they begin to eat through the hull. If they're not scraped off and the wooden ship is not put into dry dock from time to time, and these things taken care of, that ship is not going to last very long. The truth is, one of the Pilgrim's ships, the Speedwell, was a victim of just such a problem. It got just a little ways off the coast of England and it began to sink. And there were two problems. There were a huge number of barnacles on the hull, and there also had set in wood rot. So the Pilgrims all piled into the Mayflower, and you know the rest of that story. Today, the ships made of steel still have this problem because often the barnacles will cause a form of rust. And if they're not taken care of, eventually the hull will be rusted through. And I want to use this as a metaphor about the way in which we, in all of our cultures, accumulate the barnacles of our own cultures and then pass them on to others. And these barnacles on the ship of the church become huge problems and have almost sunk it in various centuries. Well, let's go back to Baal. Baal was a Phoenician, Canaanite, Assyrian god, a storm god, the god of fertility. Baal is represented as a series of gods, actually, who have hegemony over certain areas of life. So there is a Baal of money, a Baal of mammon. There is a Baal of social status and of position in the world. There is a Baal of politics to determine who shall rule. There is a Baal of religious priesthoods. And there is a Baal of human sexuality. In fact, one of the images of Baal is a hermaphrodite, the image that is used. One of the other images of Baal is of the lightning, who brings down lightning and storms and thunder and causes all of that kind of activity, which seems to be occurring in Oklahoma and Texas and Kansas and Nebraska. Baal has been busy. And then there is the symbol of Baal, who has responsibility over the deep, Tovu, the deeps, and where Leviathan frolics. And in that area, the sea, he is represented by a man at the top and a fish below. We would call him a mermaid, or merman rather. If he's hermaphrodite too, he could be a woman too, I don't know. But there is one thing absolutely clear of Baal, is that when people come under Baal's authority, Baal brooks no other authority. And Jezebel has made Baal the god of Israel. And she has slaughtered the prophets of Yahweh, except for Elijah. And Elijah is scared spitless. And then God sets up this story, this confrontation at Mount Carmel, which by the way means the garden of God. A great drought has come over the land, and there is no food, adequate food for people, and there is great expectation that Baal shall do something, for he is the god of the storms and god of fertility and the god of the fields. But nothing has happened. So Elijah sets forth this challenge. And it's a marvelous thing. I'd love to see it done by Hollywood. You can just see it, can't you? Here are the prophets of Baal up there, and they've got their altar, and they slaughter a bull, and they put it out on that, and then pretty soon they're wailing, and they're singing, and they're dancing, and they're carrying on, and pretty soon that isn't working, and they have Elijah taunting, "Oh, look, your God is asleep, fast asleep." Actually, he's gone into the water closet and relieving himself over there. That's what it really says in the Hebrew. And, he's taunting this group of priests of Baal. Well, he sits on a stone watching. Nothing happens. Okay. So then Elijah rebuilds an altar. Now remember, Elijah is not a priest. He does not have authority according to the law of God to make a sacrifice. But he's appealing to an older tradition where human beings individually had the right to go before God individually and make sacrifice and prayer to God. So he rebuilds the altar up there on Mount Carmel. And then you would expect that his show would be greater than Baal's, but he turns out, you see, instead to be a Presbyterian. "Oh, Yahweh, you know who you are. Send forth fire from heaven and show that you are really God." End of prayer. Kaboom! Fire comes down, lights the altar up, and people begin falling on their faces. Not people. This is the thing you need to hear. All the people saw it. All the people fell on their faces, and all cried out, "Yahweh is God." Without exception. Now, this story has been read over and over and over again as a form of godly imperialism. But it's not that. For Baal's prophets also shout, "Yahweh is God." And what happens is there is an opportunity here to change the dynamic between the two cultures. But what is left out of the reading today and consistently in our lectionary is the next verse. "And Elijah took the prophets of Baal down to the brook of Kishon and slaughtered them." Which is exactly what Jezebel had done to the prophets of Israel. And now we once again have the lex talionis, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, a death for a death, and we've made no advancement in who God really is. One big bloodletting on the Mount of Carmel, the garden of God. God does not command Elijah to do this, and God does not commend Elijah for doing this. I hope you hear this. Something else was supposed to have emerged there, but Elijah allowed his own human spirit, his own human way of looking at the world, and he made his own human decision for vengeance, which belongs to whom? Yahweh alone. Fast forward to Capernaum. And Jesus has just in the Gospel of Luke laid down the stories and teachings of the Sermon on the Plain. Same teachings as the Sermon on the Mount, just in a slightly different location. And he comes to the little village of Capernaum, where there is a beautiful synagogue. I stood in that synagogue. The original one there was made of black basalt. And did you hear in the scriptures who built it? A Roman centurion who loved Israel's God. Oh, if your ears didn't prick up to listen, well, something new is happening here, because that's not how the Romans treated the Israelites. And then you see the barnacles of their social status and relationships being lived out both by Jesus and by the centurion. He sends servants to say, come, please, I know you have power and authority, heal my servant. Jesus, who knows better as a Jew not to go into the home of centurion, decides to go to the house. Therefore, scraping off the barnacle of non-contact. The centurion hears he's coming and comes out going, no, because he knows the law. All you have to do, he tells Jesus, is say the word and my servant will be healed because you are in authority. Just like I am. If I tell my soldiers go, they go. If I tell my servant do this, he does that. Only say the word and my servant will be healed. Oi! This is something really new. These two cultures that have been in conflict with one another suddenly find themselves in an environment where here is a centurion who has left behind the gods of Rome and has turned to the God of Israel, and in the person of Jesus sees the authority of the Most High. And all the barnacles that have built up between the two cultures just get washed away. What are the barnacles in your life and mine? What are the barnacles in the church? How much of the stuff that we do and say is cultural and not gospel? That's what's happening right now. There's a huge sorting out again of all those things. We've gone through periods of that before. And that's happening right now. That's what Phyllis Tickle says. That's what many scholars are saying. There's a whole fermentation going on where we're trying to figure out which is substance of the ship, okay, and what's barnacle. What needs to be cleared off so that the ship of the church can move through the waters of the world again, and encountering other cultures without death and destruction, hatred and anger towards one another. Some of you know that this has been going on for a while. Those of us in college who were forced to read Will James and the Variety of Religious Experiences, you know, that's one of the great things about requirements at colleges. They force you to read things you'd never read yourself. Or Houston Smith and his study of the religions of humanity. Or Carl Jung and his Man and His Symbols, Myth, Dream, and Symbols. Or Joseph Campbell and the Power of Myths. And what you discover is that with the religions of the world, there are commonalities that we all share. Did you hear that? And then there are the barnacles of human making. The extraordinary thing about our Jesus was he cut through all of that. He practiced a religion, that's true, but he did not allow his own religious practices to cut him off from people who differed from him. For he recognized in them what we should recognize in all others of religion, the things of God at work in them. This is not a new idea, people. I want to read a little bit of Moby Dick to you. After all, it's Melville who takes this story of Ahab and Ishmael and the story of Leviathan. But I want you to hear the encounter between Queequeg and Ishmael as they share a room together before they go out to sea. I'll bet all of you missed it, except maybe Darrell Lloyd. This is what Ishmael says. He's watching Queequeg in their bedroom that they share, salaaming to his idol. And he offers Ishmael an opportunity to also make an offering. And this is what he says. I was a good Christian, born and bred in the bosom of the infallible Presbyterian Church. Bet you missed that. You didn't know Ishmael was Presbyterian, did you? How then could I unite with this wild idolater in worshiping his piece of wood? But what is worship? Thought I. Do you suppose, Ishmael, that the magnanimous God of heaven and earth, pagans and all included, can possibly be jealous of an insignificant bit of black wood? Impossible. But what is worship? Worship is to do the will of God. That's what worship is. And what is the will of God? To love God and our fellow human beings. And what I would have my fellow man do to me, that is the will of God. Now, Queequeg is my fellow man. And what I do, I wish that this Queequeg would do to me, which is to unite with me in my particular form of Presbyterian worship. Consequently, I must then unite with him in this, ergo, I must turn idolater. So I kindled the shavings, helped prop up the innocent little idol, offered him a burnt biscuit with Queequeg, salaamed before him twice or thrice, kissed his nose, and that being done, we undressed, went to bed, and peace reigned with our consciences all around the world. But we did not sleep. Instead, we chatted. What would happen if Islam and Judaism and Christianity and Buddhism and all the other religions sat down and said, let's talk? Do you think Jesus would be there? Amen.